it's Mrs. Lindquist. So today we're going to talk about sine waves. So our sine function will be in the form y equals a times sine of b theta. So theta is our angle measure, and a and b are two parameters we're going to look at that may change depending on which sine wave you're looking at. So amplitude is going to be the absolute value of a. All right. Remember, amplitude measures half of the distance between the maximum and the minimum. So if we look here at this graph, the highest this graph goes is 1, and the lowest it goes is -1. So half of the distance between 1 and -1 would be 1. So if we drew our midline of our graph, we can see that the peak from here to here is a distance of 1. So in this particular example, our A value will be 1. So what is B then? B is the number of cycles you can get between 0 and 2 pi radians. Okay, so on this graph here, this window, here we have 2 pi. How many cycles of sine are we able to get? We are able to get one full cycle. So the cycle of sine goes 0, max, 0, min, 0. And then the sine wave is going to repeat again. Okay, so let's talk about what the period is. The period is the horizontal length of our cycle. So to get that, you are going to take 2 pi and you're going to divide by b, which is the number of cycles that you can get between 0 and 2 pi. Or likewise, if you were doing degrees, it would be 360 degrees divided by b. So the pattern of sine, we already talked about that. Pattern of sine, we start with 0, we end with 0. So sine is going to look like a hill and a valley. So it starts with 0 to a max, to a 0, to a minimum, to a 0. So pattern of the y value. So when we're making our sketches of sine waves, we are going to get these key points, the 0, the maximum, the 0, the minimum, and back to the 0, we are going to take the period and we are going to break it into quarters. So we're going to do the period times 0, a quarter, a half, 3/4, and 1. So we said the amplitude here was 1, but now we need to get this parameter of b, which is the number of cycles between 0 and 2 pi. And we can see here that we have one complete cycle between 0 and 2 pi. So our b value for this graph would also be 1. So our equation would be y equals 1 times sine of 1 theta, which is the same thing as saying y equals sine theta. So this is the parent function for all sine graphs. It has amplitude of 1 and has a period of 2 pi. So let's talk about domain and range. What you're going to find with the sine wave is that it's periodic. So this pattern is going to repeat itself. It's going to keep going. The wave's going to go to the right and it's going to continue waving to the left. So our domain will be -infinity to +infinity. Remember, our x-axis is our theta. It's our degree measure. So theta is basically all real numbers. So that would be another way to write it. Okay, so what about the range? What do you think the range of this sine function is? Well, we can see the highest it goes is 1, and the lowest it goes is -1. So all of our y values are between 1 and -1. So -1 is less than or equal to y, which is less than or equal to 1. Another way to write that in interval notation would be using brackets, -1 to 1. And again, we're using brackets because we are including -1 and 1. At this point here, up at the top, the y value is 1. And down here, the y value is -1. Those are included. All right, so for example 1, it says how many cycles does each sine function have in the interval from 0 to 2 pi? Find the amplitude and the period. So when we look at this graph, again, the window is set up to go to 2 pi. So I labeled 2 pi out here on both of these. This one actually here shows me that my x maximum is 2 pi. So the window is 0 to 2 pi. Let's first take a look at our equation. So we have y equal -3 sine 2 theta. So our a value in this example is -3, and our b value is 2. So it asks you to find the amplitude in the period. Well, the amplitude we know is the absolute value of a. So in this case, it's going to be the absolute value of -3, which is 3. And again, we can see if we draw a midline through the graph, this dashed line, that to get to our peaks, we're either going up 3 or we're going down 3. So again, the amplitude basically refers to the height of the peaks if you draw the midline here at, this is y equals 0. All right, so let's talk about this b value. Our b value is 2. What does that mean? That means that we are going to get 2 cycles from 0 to 2 pi. And if we look here, we have 2 cycles. We have this green cycle and we have this blue cycle. And you might say, hey, wait a minute. How come this sine wave has a valley then a hill? And our last example, we had the hill and the valley. So what do you think in this equation is making that happen? If you said the a value being -3, you'd be correct because it makes it reflect over the x-axis. So we have 0, minimum, 0, max, 0. So we get one complete cycle of sine and then another complete cycle of sine between 0 and 2 pi. So to get our period, it's the formula 2 pi divided by b. So in this case, we would have 2 pi divided by 2, which would be pi. So we can get a full cycle of this sine wave in between 0 and pi. So here's pi. So we can get one cycle between 0 and pi. We can get another full cycle between pi and 2 pi. If we kept going, we would get another full cycle between 2 pi and 3 pi, and so on. So let's look at example B. In this one, they actually want us to write the equation. So we need to look at this graph and figure out the a and the b value on our own. So look at this graph and see if you can figure out what the a value is. So if we look at our midline of our graph, we can see the highest that this graph goes is 1, and the lowest it goes is -1. So our a value is going to be 1, and our amplitude is going to be the absolute value of 1, which is 1. Did you get that right? All right, awesome. All right, let's look at the b value, which we need to get our period. So how many cycles do you see between 0 and 2 pi? Count how many you see. So I see from there to there. So there's a hill and a valley. And I see a second one from there to there. I see a third one. And then I see one more. So my b value is 4. I have 4 cycles between 0 and 2 pi. Now that we know our b value, pause the video and write down what you think the period is. So we should be doing 2 pi divided by 4, because our b value is 4. So 2/4 is going to reduce to a half a pi. So our period is half pi. So I can get a full cycle of sine in by a half a pi. I can get another cycle in by a whole pi. And then I can get another one by 1.5 pi, and then a fourth one in between 1.5 pi and 2 pi. So what would be the equation for this sine wave? We know our a and our b value, so now we are just going to plug it in. So it's going to be y equals 1 times the sine of b theta. So sine of 4 theta. Again, theta refers to your x, and obviously we have the y. All right, well, that's the end of part 1. I'll see you in part 2 where we actually make some graphs.